Japanese craftsmanship is renowned worldwide for its attention to detail and beauty. Among its many treasures, Japanese ceramics stand out as one of the best-kept secrets. On June 25th, the Japan Society of Northern California held an online seminar titled Exploring Japanese Ceramics. During the seminar, Steve Beimel, founder of JapanCraft21, guides us through the different eras, styles, and techniques of Japanese ceramics with moderation by Steve Pollock, the president of the Japan Society of Northern California.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our program. My name is Dewan Mercado, and I am the program coordinator here at the Japan Society of Northern California. If you haven't been to our events before and this is your first one, welcome. Thank you for joining. Just to tell you a little bit about the Japan Society, we're a nonprofit based out of San Francisco, and we have programming that covers anything you can think of when it comes to Japan. So we have language classes, we'll do culture events with like Japanese archery, Japanese drumming, which is taiko. We also do a little bit more corporate business events. So we will have biotech events, healthcare related events, AI events, political events. And if you're interested in any of those, please go to our website. Our new set of Japanese classes will be coming up too. So if any of you are planning to travel to Japan or just want to learn Japanese, check our website out for that. And if you want to see our upcoming events, like our kimono event this Sunday, please go to our website as well to do that. But for today's topic, we're going to be focusing on the wonderful world of Japanese ceramics. I'm very excited to have JapanCraft21 here today. They have made it their mission to preserve traditional Japanese arts, and they are kind enough to take the time. I know it's really early in Japan to be here with us to tell us about ceramics. But before that, I would like to introduce the president of the Japan Society of Northern California, Steve Pollock, and he will introduce the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dewan, and thank you everybody for joining our program today. I'm the president of Japan Society of Northern California, Steve Pollock, and I'm very pleased to present our speaker today, Steve Beimel. He is the founder and creator of JapanCraft21 and a real expert in the world of traditional Japanese arts and crafts. We had a program a few weeks back about travel to Japan, and many people who attended that program expressed an interest in Japanese arts and crafts and having the opportunity to visit Japan potentially and learn more about them. And so I hope some of you are here today from that event as well. Steve is a longtime resident of Kyoto. He is originally from California, but has been in Kyoto for many years. And he has really dedicated his life to preserving and protecting some of the traditional arts and crafts of Japan. As many of you who have an interest in Japan may know, there are many things that characterize Japanese culture, from lacquerware to ceramics to weaving and kimono making to dyeing techniques to basket making and traditional architecture. And Steve has really put a lot of effort into trying to preserve many of these arts which are dying out in Japan because some of the traditional practitioners of these arts have been getting older, and the market for many of these traditional arts and crafts has also declined. So there are economic reasons behind the dwindling number of people practicing these skills. We asked Steve and a couple of members of his team, Yoko Hioki and Keiko Kame, to join us today to tell us about ceramics. Steve is a real expert in the world of ceramics and is going to tell us about that art tradition in Japan and share with us his experience and knowledge about the world of ceramics and ceramics making in Japan. So without any further introduction, let me turn it over to Steve Beimel, who will tell us about Japanese ceramics and share his experience in that area. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Steve. And thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. Just wanted to make one little correction. I was introduced as an expert in ceramics, and I would call myself an enthusiast. I don't have an academic background, university background in ceramics, but I have a lifetime of appreciation, and I hope to share with you some of the insights that I have gained over the years today. So I'm going to share my screen here. So we are, as Stephen and Duan mentioned, we are JapanCraft21. And today is our presentation on exploring Japanese ceramics. But I wanted to start out with just a point here. If you take all of the crafts, the master crafts passed down from century to century, sometimes over 1,000 years, and you put that on the right side of the scale from the whole world, I would bet to say that Japan has more than the whole world put together. It's an extraordinary culture, powerhouse of craftsmanship. And if we look at what's been happening in that world, in 1979, there were 300,000 master craftspeople with a minimum of 7 to 10 years of training behind them. And we're looking at about 4 or 5 years from now, we're looking at about 20,000 left. That's a 92% disappearance. This is a major meltdown, and this was our call to action to do something. So we created JapanCraft21, and we're very simple. We're very short on symposiums. We're very long on action. We try and identify problems, create strategies, and take action. And one of the things that we did, what we felt was really important at the beginning, was to define what craft meant, because, well, there's a big difference between what one's grandchild makes at summer camp and what a great Celadon artist does. And if they're both called crafts, it can be confusing. So we decided to create the category of master artist craft. This would be one of a kind or a very limited edition of one-of-a-kind artistic expressions using those master crafts techniques. Then we created the master artisan craft, which is the same level of artisanship, of craftsmanship, yet it can be done. There's an economy of scale. People can produce more of the same thing, thus bringing the price way down to be able to accommodate many more people. Crafts in general, this is a big part of our culture. They're all over the world. You don't have to have centuries of tradition behind you to go to a school for a year or two to learn how to make things like this. They're good, they're strong, they're inexpensive. And finally, hobby crafts. This is a wonderful part of our culture, where you can go to a workshop and make something like this and share it with your friends and family. So we at JapanCraft21 are focusing on master artist crafts, even though there are some, master artisan crafts, even though there will be some master artist crafts in the presentation today. Most of the crafts, most of the ceramics you will see today will be by those unknown craftsmen, so to speak, in the ceramics world. So the whole topic of Japanese ceramics is gigantic. It's a huge subject, and at JapanCraft21, we have a series of ceramics lectures. We have four full-hour presentations. So today we're just going to be seeing just a part of that. It would be impossible to show you everything. We're going to show you some highlights, but our intention is to give you a kind of a foundation to the world of Japanese ceramics. For those of you who already know about it, it will be a review. For those who are new to it, it will be hopefully an opening door. To define some terms, we often hear the terms to describe the kinds of clay or the kinds of ceramics. Earthenware would be very fragile, stoneware would be durable, and porcelain would be very, very durable. And if you look at how these are made with earthenware, you can see these are the particles of clay, and they are stuck together in the firing process at 600 to 800 degrees. They stick together. It's not, as I said, not very durable, but they do stick together, and they're fragile pieces. But if you go to stoneware to 1200 degrees approximately, you see that these particles are actually melting into each other. And if you go to porcelain, which is a different kind of clay, it's a very tight clay, it's a very, very fine particle clay. The particles just melt into a solid mass. So it's very strong, which allows us to have very thin-walled ceramics. Another term you may hear about is reduction. So in a kiln, if you reduce the oxygen at certain times of the firing, you'll get grays, blues, and blacks. If you increase the oxidation, you can get more pinks and oranges. So that's what reduction oxidation means. We're going back to the Jomon period. Japan has one of the two oldest ceramic traditions in the world. China and Japan have Japan's ceramic tradition goes back about 12,000 years. People were making ceramics 12,000 years ago. And the middle part of that period, about 6,000 years ago, was probably some of the most imaginative, creative works in the whole world of prehistory. These are found all over Japan, and every clan, every large extended family would have their own style. And it's just a testament to what is available to us in terms of creativity. Yayoi period was later. It was from about 300 BC. There was a large out-migration from southern China into Southeast Asia, and then some of those people went up through Taiwan, and others went up through Okinawa and into what is now Japan. And they brought with them a continental style and somewhat of an increase in, let's say, technical skill. But the designs are very simple. They can't compete with the designs of that previous era. But very, very practical designs. Interesting, up until this time, the Japanese, during that Jomon period, they were mostly semi-nomadic. So it was a semi-nomadic culture, moving ceramics around, which is pretty unusual. Haniwa is a very interesting era in Japan. These are hollow funerary objects, and they were buried or exposed on the grave sites of these clan leaders. And they're supposed to be otherworldly looking. They're supposed to kind of scare people away from getting too close to the tombs. And so there are horses and dogs and cats and houses and all kinds of interesting shapes. And these are they're still uncovering these all over the place. This is amazing. Sueki was a major step forward in technology. This is when Korean potters immigrated from the Korean peninsula to what is now Osaka, and they brought with them the tunnel kiln. And they also brought with them selecting clays for heat resistance. They had a limited use of the wheel, but it was this tunnel kiln which allowed them to fire up to 1,200 degrees. Prior to that, they were firing in pits in the ground, and they could only get up to about 900 degrees. So this is where they got the durability of stoneware. This is where stoneware was born in Japan. And this is what the Sueki pieces look like, in very simple continental style, this kind of smoky gray appearance. Moving forward to the Great Tang Dynasty in China in mostly the 600s and 700s. Somehow in my education growing up in the West, no one ever, in history class, they never spoke about one of the greatest civilizations in the history of the world, which is the Tang Dynasty and the capital Chang'an. They were producing amazing things. It was one of the most cosmopolitan cultures in the world. And lo and behold, I never heard about it till I came to Japan. And this is the kind of three-color ware that was popular during that period. We move forward to the Nara period in the 7th century, the 700s, and we see the Japanese emulating the Chinese style. Next, we come to the period. It starts to begin a period of large communal kilns around Japan for functional production ware. And this was in the area of what is now Tokoname. So Sanage ware was very heavily influenced by Korean work. And this type of ceramic gave birth to the 6 old kilns. the 6 old kilns. These are 6 kilns which was started in the 11 and 1200s, and they are still functioning today. And for the purpose of creating functional ware for farmers, for cottage industry, for indigo dyers, for people to store tea leaves, mortars for people's kitchens. And these were unglazed. They were glazed from 8 to 20 days. And the reason why they were unglazed, they were fired for so many days is because, first of all, they were very, very large kilns. And also there was no glaze on them. So they had to fire longer in order to seal the surface of the pot, which glaze does very easily. So they had very limited glaze technology at that time. So we see the works in Tokoname, Bizeng, Tamba, which is near Kobe, Echizen, which is in the Fukui area on the far side of the island, main island, Shigaraki, which is near Kyoto, Iga, which is also very near Shigaraki. Interesting thing is, if you see where my cursor is, you can see this little tiny speck of beige. That was the color of the pot before it was placed in the kiln. The whole thing was a very, very, very light beige. And then in the kiln, the fire scorched it red, and the ash from the wood adhered to the surface of the piece. It melted down and formed this beautiful, beautiful effect. And the same thing happened in Iga, except the clay, the chemical makeup of the clay in these areas were slightly different, so that when the wood ash reacted with the clay, it turned kind of a green color, light green in Shigaraki. In Iga, it was a dark color, darker green. And in other areas of Japan, you will see they turn different colors. And we're going to be going into that. Moving fast forward to the end of the 1500s, this was one of the great, I would call, an aesthetic revolutions of our time, probably in the whole world, one of the great aesthetic periods of time where the beauty really took over the lives of so many people, just inspired and expanded in this 30-year period. And we owe most of that to a man named Sen no Rikyū, the great tea master of the late 1500s. He codified the tea ceremony as we know it today. He's responsible for what most of Japanese residential architecture looked like for the past 400 years. He had a strong influence in art, gardens. He was the one who created kaiseki cuisine. So most of the food presentation that we see in gourmet restaurants around the world come from his way of thinking, comes from him. He focused on the beauty of handmade things, ceramics, metal, bamboo, lacquer, calligraphy. He's the one who coined the term wabi-sabi. He created a kind of ikebana for tea. So anything like understated beauty, patina, rusticity, natural beauty, which Japan is known for, can be attributed to this great man. And one thing he did was, up until his time, in what was the tea ceremony at that time, amongst the elite samurai of Japan, there was a great appreciation for perfect Chinese ceramics, exquisite, perfect Chinese symmetrical pieces. And he expanded the palette of the Japanese elite to include things like Raku. And he invented Raku. And a Raku bowl, unlike the porcelain, is cool to the touch. It's a little bit lumpy and drippy, and it's asymmetrical. It's imperfect. You could feel where the potter's fingers manipulated the bowl. You could feel that with your hands. It's a very personal type of experience, and the beauty seems to grow on one. It's not a static beauty. So Raku was in the late 1500s, and it was earthenware. It was fragile. And the second generation Raku potter, his son of Chojiro, produced red and white, which are still used today. We still see those frequently. And this is 15 generations later in the same family line, producing this world-class, very contemporary rakuware. This is Jikinyu the 15th, and his son now is holds the title of the 16th Raku potter. HON'AMI Koetsu he was a great artist, poet, and calligrapher in the early 1600s, and he studied with the third generation Raku potter, and he produced wonderful works of Rakuware, which are all very famous museum pieces now, and inspired many people. So we're going back to Shigaraki, and one thing that Sen no Rikyu did is he went to places like Shigaraki and Bizen, and he fell in love with the functional ceramics that were so common in Japan, and he had tea-ware commissioned in these kiln towns. So we see when these pieces are placed in the tunnel kiln, the deeper into the kiln you go, the lighter in color, the less effects of the wood burning will be seen. So and the closer you go to the fire, the more of those kiln effects are evident. So we begin at the innermost part of the kiln, of the tunnel kiln, Anagama. And you'll see, if you can see where my cursor is, that's the color of the clay. It's a very pale beige. When it goes into the kiln, the scorch marks color it, give this reddish color. And you see these tiny specks, these white specks. These are bits of feldspar. These are particles of feldspar that are in the clay that the potter purposely leaves in the clay. And then they explode during the firing process, and they come on the surface to give us this wonderful texture. So now going a little closer to the fire, you'll see that there's no feldspar left in this clay. It's very clean, very pure clay. But you see these two focal points on the front, and this is called botamochi. We're all familiar with the concept of resist. You know, when we go to the beach and our skin gets darker in the sun, but where our bathing suit is, the sun doesn't touch it, and it's much lighter. And it's the same thing happens here. What they will do is the potter places the pot in the kiln, and the kiln at that period, the clay is this color, this light beige, and puts these two cracker-like, very brittle ceramic clay discs on, and then fires it, and then this is what it looks like afterwards. It's really simple but brilliant. This, you can see, this is closer to the fire. It's darker red, and in the front there's a focal point here. There's a light spot in the front, and so where our attention is drawn to this, and this is achieved by another kind of resist in the kiln. If you place another pot, for example, right in front of your desired piece, then this bowl here on the right will be the resist, and when it's taken out of the kiln, it will look like that. So depending on where you place the piece in the kiln, you can have all kinds of different effects. And so one of the great skills of a potter is knowing where in the kiln to place where the higher oxygen areas are, the lower oxygen areas are, where the fire will reach, where it won't reach, that, etc. You can see here there are excuse me. You can see there are seashell marks here. There's one here and one there, which tells us that this bowl was placed on its side, and it was placed on seashells to prevent it from sticking to the floor of the kiln. And there was ash that accumulated at the bottom of the kiln and encrusted into the side of this bowl to give it this texture. So if you notice on the right side, the name of this potter, Otani Shiro SS. SS would mean superstar. So whenever this is to indicate the difference between production ware, or let's say the work of an unknown potter, and the work of an artist craftsperson. Here's a very interesting piece. If you see, there's a seashell here, here, and here. So this is placed on its side in the kiln, and the ash flies from the wood, and it adheres to the top of this piece, it accumulates, and then by gravity, it drips down into riverlets. And then when it's set up, standing up straight, it looks like this. So you have this bits of what is called dragonfly eyes. It's bits of glass which have formed at the bottom. In the front of the kiln, on the left side, you have this very creamy effect of the ash, which had adhered to the surface. And on the right side, you have this black encrusted part from the ash, which was, so it was partially buried in the ash. The front of the kiln is the most, let's say it's the most expensive part of the kiln. It's, you get the most extraordinary works out of the front of the kiln, yet that's where the most damage is. So you can, a potter, it's not unusual to lose half of what's in the front of the kiln, but the things that remain are oftentimes brilliant. So we're moving to Iga, and as I said, the Iga, the color of the drippings in Shigaraki tend to be light green, and in Iga they tend to be darker green. So you could see how the same bowl, the same process, just done a few miles to the east of Shigaraki, produces a much deeper green. So nothing on the surface of this vase was coated before firing. It was just a pure beige colored piece of clay in this form. And then everything else came from the effects of the kiln, the wood, ash, and the flames. So just the coincidences of the firing can be amazing. Tamba, the area near Kobe, very well-known artist in a place that the town is actually called Tachikui, and there are 25 or 30 potters in small studios lined up along a long street, and you can go from one to the next. And one of the superstars there is Nishihata Tarashi, and he tries to infuse, looking at the original, he tries to infuse some of the feeling of these original jars that go back 800 years. He tries to express that in his contemporary works. So you'll see in this bowl here, the bottom part is not glazed, so whereas the top is. So it's a nice fusion of contemporary and traditional technique. His next door neighbor is Ichino Masahiko. He's also a superstar, and he also likes to have some of the clay unglazed. Bizen is probably the largest kiln area in Japan. There are hundreds of potters working in and around the city of Imbe. And just as the dripping of the Shigaraki was light green, the dripping of the Iga was dark green. In this area, in Bizen, it's a kind of creamy golden color called sesame or goma. Again, those cracker-like pieces of ceramic were placed on the surface of this dish, and you can see that the clay in Bizen area is much darker than it is in Shigaraki. So this is the resist. You have 6 spots, but around it you have the golden goma sesame kiln effect. Blue Bizen is very unusual. It's very unusual. This is also, it's a very natural technique, and it's basically the addition or reduction of oxygen, which will produce a bluish color. The less oxygen will be the more blue. The more oxygen will be more of a brownish color. So in this piece here, we see 3 very distinct kiln effects. First of all, we see on here on the left this grayish color. This was formed by a chemical reaction in the kiln where there was it was partially buried in the ash, so there was very little oxygen going to it. You see the red part, which is the scorching from the flames, and you see the golden sesame coloring around the edge. So this is quite a beautiful piece. It's a cold water jar for tea. Now, and then finally in Bizen, we have the Hidatsuki. Hidatsuki is, I'm going to say finally, because we have actually a couple more. We have, traditionally in the ancient kilns, they would wrap pieces of ceramic in rice straw to prevent them from sticking to each other. The kilns were very heavily packed. And so as a result, this straw ash gets burnished into the surface, creates this beautiful effect. And so they're still doing that today. Another resist technique is when you can see that at the top, you have the burnished straw, and at the bottom you have the kiln effects. So the way this is done is you place a pot over the top, fire it, and then afterwards you can have this fusayaki, which is very common with tokuri sake flasks or vases. Moving to the far west of the island of Honshu is Hagi. Hagi is a kiln which traces its roots back to Korea. Sen no Rikyu fell in love with the folk ware, the folk inexpensive rice bowls of Korea in the late 1500s, and he brought them back to Japan, and he elevated to the tea room, which is the highest level in the Japanese culture at that time. And that gave birth to Hagi, an amazing tradition that's 400 years old, and it's known for its warmth and its softness. So in Hagi, you have three kinds of clay, so grayish, dark red, and yellow, and those can be mixed in various ways by the potter to achieve certain effects. And there are two glazes, and this is important. There are two major glazes in Hagi. One is this rice straw ash. It's very creamy. It's opaque. And the other is the opposite. It's completely translucent. It's completely clear. And that's half wood ash and half feldspar. So in this particular bowl, there are three kinds of clay mixed here. You can see where my cursor is. There's no glaze covering it, but just the covering of the clay with the translucent glaze preserves the color and actually amplifies the color. These cups were dipped into a clear translucent glaze upside down, and then again dipped a second time, but the second time it was dipped 1/3 of the way. So you're seeing the glaze in two layers, so it becomes somewhat opaque in the second dipping, and it gives it a nice contrast. Miwa Kyusetsu, the 11th, he traces his lineage back to the original Korean potter from around the year 1600, and he has two brothers, and they have been I think for the past 50 years they've been very active in Hagi and in Japan in the superstar world. And so he invented this oni Hagi. It's gritty, sandy clay. It's very thick, white ash glaze. So the ash glaze, because it's so thick, in the firing, it shrinks and exposes a little bit of the clay beneath it. Kaneta Masanao is an extraordinary potter. I would call him a newcomer in Hagi because his family has only been there for 200 years. He is a sculptor. He has his family tradition, and he studied sculpture, and his pieces are very sculptured. This is scooped out. It's kurinuki. It's scooped out. It's not done on a wheel, so it's very dynamic in shape. And the coloring is he uses the thick, white, creamy rice ash glaze, and with a high oxygen levels to turn it this beautiful pink. So you're all familiar with slip, but just as a review, slip is clay mixed with water to form a very soupy consistency, and it can be poured into molds for production ware, or it could be coating on a body of clay. And so for example, this piece is coated with slip, and then it's coated with translucent glaze, and it's fired in a low oxygen kiln. And so all these orange spots there, that is the reaction of the iron in the clay. Here we have a mizusashi water jar, and it's this creamy rice ash glaze, and see how beautifully it drips down in a high oxygen condition. So it's pink and it's dripping over the unglazed portion at the bottom. Moving down to the island of Kyushu, where we have Karatsu, which is another kiln town which started just about the same time as Hagi with the same Korean influence. You can imagine, this is testament to the influence of Sen no Rikyu. Two kiln towns are born because he preferred rustic ceramics, and so he was very, very influential. And so Eigaratsu would be the creation of these very simple patterns that are patterns, or let's say motifs, painted onto the surface of pots with a brush and iron oxide. Shosengaratsu would be where the body of the pot is covered with the black iron oxide, and then it's turned upside down, dipped into the white ash glaze, and then it drips down here. And this originally in the folk world of Korea, this was to brighten up dark looking ceramics. It was just a very spontaneous, very, very quick process, and it wasn't meant to be artistic, so to speak. But there's such beauty in the spontaneity of that action, and let's say the unconscious effect of that. It's really beautiful. Another Korean technique where you dip a brush, a wide brush, into slip, and you just brush it on very, very not haphazardly, but very simply, very, very enthusiastically, let's say. One more Korean technique would be mishima, which you make a stamp, and you make stamp impressions into the clay before it's fired, and also you make incisions. You dip the whole thing into slip, then wipe it off, and it's very imperfect and it's very lovely. It's a very nice warm feel. And finally, madara, which is again the white ash clay, the ash glaze, covering a very, very rough ceramic base, and then when it's fired, the black and blue spots are created by the iron which is in the clay. The second great tea master was Furuta Oribe, and he was extremely influential. He introduced 6 tea styles of ceramics into the mainstream of the tea world. He was located down in the Gifu area, somewhere between Nagoya and Tokyo. One of his works, the Kiseto, there's partially, let's say, a lower amount of iron in the glaze. It's somewhat of an iron glaze. With the green is affected by copper sulfate, the green motif. So it's this yellowish and the green together. He also favored this black bowl, which is very similar to the Kyoto Raku bowl. You can see where the fingerprints of the potter, when holding the bowl, was dipped into the glaze, and and then when it's red hot at 800 degrees, it's pulled out of the kiln like a burning coal with iron tongs and dipped into water and turns black. The style of ceramics which took the name of Oribe are the focus on this deep, very luxurious green. So these would be for the tea ceremony. These would be dishes for serving vegetables during the kaiseki meal. And so it's the deep green plus the very spontaneous, almost childlike drawings, paintings in beige and brown. And the shapes of the works of Oribe are very, let's say, very flamboyant. They're wild, they're wonderful. They're baskets and bridges and fans and boats. Just to remind, if everyone could be sure to mute themselves because we're getting a little bit of a feedback. So if you can mute yourself. A contemporary Oribe bowl, another contemporary cold water jar. So you still see the same green, beige, and brown, but in a less formalized way. Ordinarily, it's not 100%, but ordinarily the dishes that are used in a tea ceremony, which are Oribe, would be green, and the bowls are normally the black Oribe. And when you think of this is 400 years old, the style, the patterns are 400 years old, the creativity was enormous. When you think of what we, or most of us as Westerners, were doing in Europe 400 years ago, this looks like contemporary art from the 20th century. The Shino style is another one of Oribe's favorites. It begins with red iron oxide, red iron slip painted over the bowl, and then it's shaped and somewhat, and then a layer of feldspar is painted over that. And the feldspar, depending on the amount of oxygen, it will turn gray or it will turn pink or orange. The third great tea master was Kobori Enshu, who was, by the way, one of the great garden masters of Japan. And his favorites, he had 6 favorite kilns, one of which was Takatori, and which is well known for this way that in important pieces in tea, for the cold water jar, etc., you have this dripping in the front. Very elegant, understated. And this would be a chaki, a tea caddy for the thick tea ceremony. Most of us are familiar with the thin tea, but the very formal tea would be thick tea, and it's probably 3 times as thick as the matcha most people are accustomed to drinking. An interesting thing happened at this time. The tunnel kiln, which had been introduced in the year 400, more or less, 300-400, was wholesale abandoned in the early 1600s in favor of the climbing kiln. The climbing kiln was also from Korea, and it was revolutionary in that it saved so much money for potters. It was so much more fuel efficient, allowing each one of these chambers could be fired separately, saving a tremendous amount of fuel, and also giving the potter much more control. The good news about the anagama is that you get extraordinary kiln effects in an anagama tunnel kiln. However, you get a lot of damage. So by creating the climbing kiln, you eliminate much of the damage, you have much better efficiency, but however, you lose a lot of those extraordinary kiln effects for which the tunnel kiln was famous. Porcelain came to Japan a little late, but a little late, mainly about 700 years after China. And the reason why it was so late was because they had just discovered a certain kind of clay, kaolin clay, in around that time, allowing them to make it. So they didn't have the raw material for that, and most of that happened at that point in Kyushu, around Saga, Fukuoka, Nagasaki area. So we begin with the white porcelain clay, and it's fired at 800 degrees, bisque fired, and then the artist will paint in the design of the first layer, which would be blue, and then the design is filled in with cobalt. Then glaze is put over the cobalt. The cobalt turns bright blue, and then fired at 1300 degrees. So under the glaze is blue, and over the glaze are other colors, and that's what overglaze, underglaze means. And this material here is made from glass, ground to the consistency of talcum powder. And it's painted on, and it's fired at 800 degrees. Then oftentimes gold is applied in a liquid form, and that's fired at 600 degrees. And you get pieces like this, which are, when you think of the time, the effort, the energy of 4 firings to make something like this, treasure. And then blue and white also came a little late to Japan, from about the 1600s, but developed very rapidly at that time. Kakiemon, which would be this overglazed red, and the Kakiemon family, 15 generations later, are still in business. They're still a major kiln in Japan. Imari most people in the West have heard of Imari ware. Became very popular in the West during the Meiji period and after, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Satsuma was produced mostly for export. So you can see that the aesthetic is really much, it's not what we would think normally of a Japanese aesthetic. It's what the Japanese thought the Westerners would like. But the Japanese for themselves, the upper class, were making things like this at their time. Nabeshima were giftware for high-level feudal lords and samurai. When we say celadon, everyone has a different color that comes to my mind. It comes to their mind, but actually celadon represents at least 20 different shades, 25 different shades. So the more iron in the glaze is more olive. The less iron is green, even less is blue. And then that's all within a well-timed reduction of oxygen in the kiln. You might think of it's like glass, there's a bit of green in glass, and the more layers of glass you have, the deeper the color will be. Well, this is what celadon is like. The more layers you get, the deeper color. This piece was made in the 1600s, but this Chinese style is still being made in Japan. Styles like this, I should say. But contemporary celadon artists are really turning many heads with their amazing works of sensitivity, of creativity, of crackles are common in celadon, but not complete, not in all works. So this person, Minegishi, prefers crackles. Crackles are achieved by speeding up somewhat the cooling process. So the crackles in the kiln, the crackles will appear. If you have a very slow process of cooling, then you have no crackles. So it's the artist's choice. Probably the most famous celadon artist in the world is, this is not a functional piece, but I felt I needed to show it because it's so well known, and it's such an outstanding piece. It's very lightweight. It's about 1 meter wide, and all those what you're seeing, those gradations of blue color, are one of his outstanding traits as an artist. So Kyoto was a major ceramic area from the mid-1600s to today, and I'm just going to go through a couple people here. Nomura Ninsei was the great inspiration. You can see, he wasn't producing one-of-a-kind pieces. It was production ware, but his works are still being produced in Kyoto. They're still popular, as are the works of Ogata Kenzan, one of the great artists, I think, of the last 400 years. And his work was primarily for food presentation, and I think his work speaks for itself. So I'm fast forwarding to JapanCraft21 and how we got involved in all of this. I had to end the ceramics portion at that part because it could go on, as I said earlier, forever. It's such a huge field, and hopefully we can meet again and we can look at more of the many, many styles. But hopefully today you got a good taste. But in JapanCraft21, as I mentioned, Japan is a huge world of craftsmanship that's decreasing rapidly, that's evaporating before our very eyes. And so we created many programs in order to address that. One of them was there was no, when we say take actions, one of the things we did, the problem was there was no list of crafts in Japan. The government identified 250. We knew that there were more, and we kept looking for more and more. We created a list with 1,954 crafts between Hokkaido and Okinawa. It took us a year to do this, and now we're creating on a site which will have photographs and explanations of each of these. Just goes on and on, the number of crafts here. One problem we faced was we wanted to encourage building of traditional buildings in Kyoto again. There were no young carpenters who knew how to do joinery. They weren't taught that anymore. So we started a school to train carpenters and plasterers to do mud walls and gardeners to build gardens. We've now graduated 22 people from 1 to 1.5 year courses. It's all paid for. It's all free education to working crafts, to working people in their fields. We have a program. We have apprentices where we have 10 master dyers, probably the finest dyers in the planet of silk, hand dyers. In their 70s, 80s, and 90s, they had no one to take over their crafts. And so we found 4 people in their 30s, experienced journeyman level dyers, and now we pay their living expenses so they could study with these 10 eldermen and full-time and move on to the path of mastership to save these crafts. And we also have an extraordinary producer who is marketing the work that that the elderly men are doing now and what these young people will be doing. We have an online social media presence with Facebook and Instagram, totaling over 5,000 people. We have monthly presentations like the one we're seeing today. We have a contest every year where we choose 10 extraordinary people in the crafts field. The problem that we were looking at was we didn't know where to begin to revitalize crafts. So we had a contest and asked for craftspeople with great talent, design sense, guts, passion, with great ideas to come forward, submit their ideas for projects. And we chose 10 of those people every year. And we've created a group called our Craft Leaders Group. We spend a total of $100,000 every year in supporting them in many ways, promoting them, giving them many opportunities. And we realized after the first year that these were our first 10 winners, and these are the things that they have in common with each other. They had so many things in common. We were really blown away when we saw this. Some are in education together, some are in dyeing, some are in paper, some in woodworking, but they had all these connections. And the second year we added 10 more people and we said, my God, look at the connections these people have. And the third year we have 30 people, and it's like the 6 levels of separation that we speak about that have so much in common. So we really started to promote them getting together, having to support each other, to inspire each other, to collaborate with each other. This is not very common in Japan. Mostly craftspeople work independently, and they really don't see what's going on around them. And so we now have a dynamic group of 30 people in many different fields supporting each other. Our first prize winner this last year created his third generation bucket maker, and now he's making champagne buckets. This is the kind of talent that he brought to his traditional field. And this last year, he created a room. It's a tea room, made like a bucket. It's made from hinoki cypress. It can be assembled in 90 minutes. So it's portable, it's waterproof, and we think this is going to have an effect on architecture. So please visit our website. And if you are so moved, we would love to have you join us in any way to donate to this process. All the money goes to promoting the last great effort of craftspeople coming forward. So we offer many ways of donating, and you can get tax donations from this. So sorry I went a few minutes over my promised 45 minutes, but sometimes I get carried away.
Well, thank you, Steve. That was a wonderful walkthrough, or maybe a run through a large number of master ceramicists in Japanese history. And thank you for all the work that you do to preserve traditional Japanese crafts. We're going to start off with a few questions for you and then open it to audience participation. One of the things I was wondering as you were kind of going through the different artisans that you were talking about, how did somebody traditionally become a master ceramics maker? What is involved in kind of the training and study period for people who, some of the types of people that you gave examples of their work?
Well, everything really changed after the war. So before the war, there was one way. After the war, there have been two ways to enter into this field. So before the war, you become an apprentice for someone. And it's the Japanese way of teaching is very different from the rest of the world, I found. They don't actually teach. As an apprentice, you just watch and you emulate. You watch, you emulate, and so the student does much by trial and error, and they make lots and lots and lots and lots of mistakes. Rather than being taught the right way from the very beginning, that's a very fast way of learning, but it also is very limiting because you don't have the benefit of all your trial and error experience. So that was the apprentice way, and usually we're looking at about 8 to 10 years as an apprentice, and that still exists today. The other way is, after the war, the university system in ceramics became very, very active. There were major universities would create ceramics programs. And so many of today's superstars are also coming from the university tradition. And I must say that it's opened up the field very much to women. Women have, in a traditionally male-dominated field, the egalitarian nature of a university has opened up the field to women, and now there are significant numbers of female superstar artists who have been emerging the last 20, 30 years.
That's great. And I wonder, one of the things that often comes up in other regions around the world is, the economics of some of these traditional artisans, furniture makers, architects, and so on. How were these types of arts traditionally supported in Japan? Was it a patronage system? Did they work for people in nobility or the samurai, or were they people who just took up a craft? Can you tell us a little bit about how that evolved and how people support themselves today?
Well, that's really an important question. Prior to 1868, which, as we know, was the year that Japan ended feudalism and entered into the modern, almost we could say the Western world. Prior to that time, each feudal fief each feudal state in Japan had craftspeople who they were supporting. And this, after the beginning of the Edo period in the year 1600, all of the wars that had been fought for centuries and centuries, occupying the time of young men, basically taking their time, taking their energy, those wars stopped. And so for 250 years, there was this protracted period of peace. And many of these feudal areas would enlist these samurai foot soldiers who were still working as they were still soldiers. They were still in that profession, but they would start making things. And the municipality, when I say municipality, the feudal fief would support them, and this would be a source of income for them for each one of these semi-autonomous city states. So it was all. They were told what to make. You know, they were asked to make certain things, and those would be marketed by the fief. But after Meiji began, that all went away, and then the Industrial Revolution came, and it was a bit of a mishmash. But what the prefectures, which were formed after Meiji restoration, the new version of the feudal states, the modern version, those municipalities or governments took up some of the slack for marketing for their districts. And that's really falling apart. In the last 30 years, that's a whole other subject. I don't know how deeply you want to go into that, but the whole era, one of the reasons why JapanCraft21 was formed was there seems to be a vacuum in the promotion of ceramics and all the crafts at this point. Now, the ceramic artists, the superstars, that level of artist has no problem because they have galleries that support them. And they've created international followings. But for the run-of-the-mill person who has genius ability but no name, it's very difficult.
Well, I'm kind of both impressed and I feel also a little bit daunted by the task you've set out for yourself with preserving, these not just, ceramics arts, but, many different traditional arts across such a range of activities and types of artistic work. So I assume that your work is generating a lot of support from the Japanese government in Japan, or how are you managing to kind of generate the support you need to, continue your work and support all these, literally hundreds, if not thousands of, traditional crafts?
First of all, we're still, a relatively small organization. So in terms of the government assistance, that's an interesting thing. And I don't know how politically correct this will be, but, for example, in America, there's a fentanyl epidemic, and the government is pouring lots of money and effort into that, and they're doing the best they can, as much as a government can do, and yet some of the places that are really having success would be maybe a church in a town which is getting people together, and they have a program. Maybe it's a group of mothers get together and do something. I would compare what we're doing to those smaller groups. The government is trying, the government doesn't even know it has 1,954 crafts. And so we are, and I don't know that for a fact, but the government is doing a lot in its own way. Unfortunately, it's all disappearing, and we, as the mothers of those people, in a sense, have taken up the job of trying to find problems, identifying them, getting a strategy, and just going right ahead and putting it into action, because there's no time for a symposium and a discussion anymore.
Well, I see that we've actually been getting quite a few questions through the chat, and so I want to, make this a little bit more interactive presentation and encourage people to, ask questions of you. You can either do that directly if you're still on the call and would like to kind of turn on your camera. We'll kind of reach out to you to prep you to pose a question. But we also are happy to kind of read the questions that people are sending in as well. And Michelle Peters asked, as have several people on the call have mentioned, that they collect some different kinds of ceramics from Japan, Bizen ware and Shigaraki ware. And you had mentioned these 6 old kilns and the fact that many of them are still in use. Is there any danger of these old kilns going away, or how are they being preserved and maintained today?
There's a big danger of them going away. I'd say that they're all struggling. They're all really struggling. And it's ironic because they're producing, as those collectors know, some of the most extraordinary works of ceramics in the world. And the fact that nobody really know, how many people in America walking down the street will know what Bizen is, or Shigaraki, or the 6 old kilns? I mean, it's the fact, this is like a huge secret. And if part of our educational outreach is just letting people know that, by the way, one of the great genius cultures of the world is right next door. Have you noticed? I mean, so yes, those 6 kilns are just, a few of the superstar people are doing well, but most of the people, not only the people who are making the pots themselves, but the people who are making tools, people who are making kilns, people who are actually mining the clay, and all those people are having a very difficult time, and they're disappearing.
Yeah, and it seems like so are those kilns, are they commercial operations that are owned by somebody, or how are they?
So that's a really good question. I think the word kiln can be it can be confusing. Originally, they were large communal efforts, in traditional times, and now a kiln town will have anywhere from, let's say, in Bizen, I think there are like hundreds of independent potters working in the same area, and that you'll see the same thing in other places. I think in the Echizen area, in the Fukui area, there are probably 50 people working. In Tokonami, there are probably 50, 75 people. I'm just off the top of my head, but there are independent potters, and each one has to market themselves, find their own expression that will attract attention. They have to do all their own marketing, or their own distribution, their own online presentations. They have to do everything themselves. Whereas before, they had a lot of assistance from let's say department stores, and it was much more organized, and it was a much bigger effort to support them in the past.
Great. I see Jeff Trevino has asked a question. Are you available, Jeff? Do you want to ask Steve your question? I'm not sure if Jeff is still with us, so let me just jump in and ask it. You had shown some materials that you put together through JapanCraft21, specifically a spreadsheet of different artisans and those kinds of things. Are those materials publicly available, or how can people access that kind of information?
Okay, well, our particular list we are about to make that public. We're just putting that together, and we will be having that on our website shortly. It's we're just doing the graphics right now to figure out, and also to figure out the most intuitive way to make that available. So we will have that on our website, hopefully within a few months.
All right, great. And I know you have a ton of other resources available through your site, so I encourage people to check out the JapanCraft21 website if they haven't had a chance to. How about, let's see, I see a question from Pamela George. Do you want to come on camera and ask your question, Pamela?
Sure, I think I'm already on camera. Hi, Steve. I know you from Jill in Santa Fe, and
Yes.
Philip Kempner as well. I'm wondering when the Japanese ceramics industry started using maker's marks on pieces, or did they only put maker's marks on pieces that were meant for export?
You mean the signing of their name or
signing on their name on the bottom, because the earlier pieces, of course, have no signature and we have to identify them through color
right?
and shape.
Well, the whole art world took a big shift right after the Meiji period. Actually the word art really, geijutsu or bijutsu, those words were not actually part of the Japanese vocabulary up until the modern period. These were things that they're making beautiful things, and there were very few artists, so to speak. The whole idea of an artist going out and expressing themselves like this is a very Western and modern concept. So it hasn't been that long. Modern period, let's say, since the late 1800s, I would say. I mean, of course, there must be.
So Steve, this might be a silly question from a non-expert, but you showed a lot of works from traditional artists back from the 1600s or earlier that were identified with a specific person. How are those known to be made by a specific individual or artisan?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm just when those were works that were commissioned at the highest level of Japanese culture. Sen no Rikyu, asking something to be made. One of the most HON'AMI Koetsu, one of the most famous artists in Japanese history, making bowls. I don't think we need to have much background information. It's so much a part of the culture. It's so well known. So
let's see, we've got a few more questions. Bernard Walter, are you still on the call, and do you want to ask your question?
My name is Bernard Walter. I think in 1981, I went to Urasenke. No, it's right there. I went to just outside Kyoto to the Oomoto School of Traditional Japanese Art.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you knew David Kidd and Urasenke and Morimoto, and is there an active interaction with them in that organization?
So to give some background, actually, Jacqueline Morgan, I think, is on this call. She also attended that school. I just noticed. The Oomoto Kyo is a Shinto sect, which part of its reason to be is we experience spirit through the Japanese arts. So by doing pottery, by doing Japanese dance, by the tea ceremony, you can have an experience of spirituality. I think that would describe what their point of view. So they created schools for people to come, and so it's not didactic. It's not there's no proselytizing. Through your experience with these arts, you internally will have a spiritual experience, which is a very ecumenical, beautiful thing, I think. And so, yes, I knew Morimoto very well, very, very well. The Morimoto story, he's one of the great collectors of Japanese and Asian art in the world. We could have a 1 hour presentation on the life of David Kidd and Morimoto. I didn't know David Kidd, but I knew Morimoto very well.
So you still interact with them?
Morimoto's he's experiencing the arts from a higher level now. He passed on a few years ago.
Thank you.
Great. I see Grant Strawcutter has a question. Grant, are you still online? Do you want to ask your question?
I think he's left.
Okay, let me go ahead and read it then. He wanted to know, he had a question about how contemporary artists are incorporating traditional techniques and designs in their work, and kind of how it's influencing, how the traditions are influencing contemporary works today.
Well, it's a body of knowledge which has grown, and the thing about when you learn a Japanese craft, because you're learning on your own, and because when I say on your own, because it's so much of it is trial and error, you create ways of doing things that probably you're the only one who will do it that way. So you're building on your experience of what has been done in the past, and you're incorporating your own creativity and your own methodology as it's evolved. So it's not a static process. And that's why we have such extraordinary variety from artist to artist. But when you see some of the things people are doing, for example, Kondo Takahiro is one of the great current artists, and how he's introduced glass into ceramics, or he's introduced silver in a like a mist-like way. So he had these speckles of silver affixed to the surface of the bowl. These are all brand new techniques, yet they're based on age-old wisdom. So it's a very exciting thing. It's not done by textbook. It's all done by hard work and trial and error and inspiration.
Great. Steve, I mentioned at the start that we had done a program on travel to Japan. I know that was your prior career, but a lot of people, I think, on this call probably are interested in maybe they live in Japan or visiting Japan and seeing some of these kinds of works. Do you have any recommendations of galleries, museums, places that people can find some of the kind of craft work that you're talking about, and if they're interested in collecting it, potentially doing that?
Absolutely. In fact, we've put together a list of current exhibitions in Japan, and we update that every month. It's on our website. So it's not only the one of a kind, let's say, exhibitions, temporary exhibitions, but we indicate shops where people can, and galleries where people can purchase or at least see wonderful works of art. And we've also extended that to the US and a little bit to Europe. So in major centers in the US, in the Bay Area, in New York, Chicago, Washington, DC, we list all the current exhibitions of master craftsmanship from Japan. And that could it's really easy to find. It's right at the top of our webpage. You just click on exhibitions.
And do you have any recommendations of places where people potentially can experience or learn these techniques? I'm sure that many people on the call, may be interested in making ceramics or involved in that themselves, or, are there other places that you can refer people to?
In other words, coming to Japan to learn things. It's, that's, we get asked that a lot, not just for ceramics, but for many of the crafts. It's first of all, the masters most of them are not doing well financially, so it's very difficult for them to take on apprentices at this time. That's one of the work we're doing, is one of the kinds of work we're doing. There are in some municipalities, they will have day classes, or, but it's either very, very entry level or not at all. It's, if someone who's done ceramics in the States and wants to come in and improve their skills, I'm saying it's not impossible, but it's not really that easy to find opportunities to do that. And if one, I'd say persistence is the rule. It's even difficult for Japanese to find opportunities like this, but you knock on a door long enough, and eventually you'll find a door that will open.
Well, one thing sounds like people can support your work and try to expand, opportunities for people who are in the field to, train and learn the skills. I'm curious, now that you've been at JapanCraft21 for a while, what sort of impact do you see it having on people in Japan? Have you, what sort of feedback are you getting for your work? What kinds of things have you seen, how it has influenced people? I thought it was very interesting to see your kind of network diagram of how the connections among the people you've awarded and recognized have kind of grown. But are there other things that you're seeing that are kind of positive directions in the traditional crafts world?
Well, amongst the applicants to our contest, we have people who, let's say 4 years ago, they say, I want the first prize so I can fund my project. And now we're getting people who, of course, they would like the first prize to fund their project. But in addition to that, say, I want to be part of that group. I want to be part of that craft leader group because there's energy there and there's a lot of possibility. So we're seeing actually our first prize winner from this last year. That was his primary reason for joining. I mean, he was already pretty successful, and yet he wanted to be part of our group to interact with all of our members. So we're also finding, there's amongst some people, we're finding that it was a very grim picture, and it's like there's a glimmer of hope, and maybe we can do something. Like we see that a lot in our textile dye program, where in Kyoto it's not a secret that the kimono industry is hanging by a bare thread right now, no pun intended. And we now have this, not only our 4 apprentices, but the people in their milieu who are they're excited about, well, maybe we could do something, maybe we could be part of that. So there's like there's this groundswell of enthusiasm or optimism which is growing.
Great. Well, we are about at the end of our time that we had scheduled for today's program. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dewan to kind of wrap us up. But in the meantime, if you're willing to stay afterwards, a lot of times we'll turn off the recorder and welcome people to just kind of kind of live chat with you on their Zoom link, if you're willing to stay a few more minutes after our closing, and would encourage those of you who are interested in engaging with Steve a little bit more to stay online. As soon as we wrap up the formal part of the program, then we will continue the conversation a little bit with Steve as we go forward. Dewan, you want to wrap us up?
Yes, I do. And so thank you everyone today for joining. If you want more events like this, we would love to hear it. We're going to be posting a survey in the chat, and we'll also be emailing it to you. So if you want a part 2, if you want to learn about different Japanese crafts, if you want this to be a series, please let us know. These surveys are very helpful for us to see the demand about topics such as this. And just to reiterate, we also have a kimono event in San Jose. So if you're in the Bay Area and you're available this Sunday, we still have spots available for our kimono event. We'll be working with the San Jose Kimono Club and be having a kimono demonstration. And we also invite you to look at our language classes and to look at the upcoming events that we have in July. And so before we head off, I want to give Steve Beimel one more chance, just if any closing remarks, any last things you want to say before we get into our casual conversation.
Well, thank you all for coming. Of course, we would love to have people participate with us. It's, we're climbing a mountain in a sense, but the people who are involved with us have an opportunity to be active members of the Japanese craft community, not just looking from afar as passive viewers, but to be actual part of what we're doing. It's a very exciting time. It's the most exciting time of my life to see opportunities being given to young people to really flourish and grow for the benefit of all mankind, because the Japanese, the Japanese crafts belong to the world, not just to Japan. So please come join us in any way that resonates with you.
Great.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much, Steve. And let's turn off the recorder and encourage people to share their questions with you if they want to stay on a few minutes.
Building bridges between the United States and Japan since 1905. Japan Society.